Namaskar. Welcome to this session of Straight Drive. I'm Sudhanshu Mani. Today we have invited Mr. Anil Swarup, the well-known IAS officer, now retired. As you know, he has worked in several capacities in the state and center, notable being Union Labor Ministry, where he worked on the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana, which was a success. And he was the secretary in coal ministry, where he conducted coal auctions in a very transparent manner, and that too in the background of the coal scam. And then he was secretary school education and literacy, where he did human work. He has started a foundation, Nexus of Good, which is all about sharing the positivity around us for inspiration to others to contribute and not complain. And he writes a weekly column in The Guardian, Making It Happen, wherein such stories of civil servants are narrated as have tried to make it happen with a view to dispelling the negativity and the negative image of the civil service, and for it to act as motivation for others to be positive and contribute. And he has written a book, now not just a civil servant, eminently readable, to know how India incorporates functions, or rather should function. So I'll come to you, Mr. Swarup. Thanks for joining us. As you know, our country has faced, or rather is facing, huge challenges in this year. What stands out are, of course, the COVID and its continuing spread, if I may say. Connected to that has been the rather insensitive handling of the migrant labor and its fallout on employment and otherwise. Then the severe downturn in economy and of course, the intrusion of and the LAC issues with China. So I know you strongly believe that blame storming is something we must avoid. And at the same time, we cannot ignore the handling of these crises to learn lessons for future. So as such an experienced civil servant, how do you assess the performance? And more importantly, so what are the lessons that India has learned and the way forward, sir?
First of all, I think COVID is a very unprecedented occurrence. So to say that it wasn't handled or was handled correctly would not be a right statement. In large ways, I think the handling was fine. In some aspects, it wasn't so good. So let me try and elaborate. I think the initial lockdown that was imposed enabled the government to prepare itself for the coming days in the sense of preparing healthcare facilities so that they could manage the people who got infection. And in that sense, I think it was a good decision because it gave some breathing time to the government and the agencies to prepare themselves for the fallout of COVID. However, the handling of migrant laborers, I think, left a lot to be desired. There was not clarity of understanding, there was no clarity of thought, and hence that crisis arose. And you had these migrant workers walking miles and miles to reach their homes. This could have been handled because what surprises me as district magistrates, we haven't, most of us haven't handled crises of this scale, but I remember distinctly that during floods, we used to engage and get the schools where we would house those displaced people. That could have easily been done in the present instance also, that instead of pushing these people to go back to their homes and then come back again in search of employment, they could have been housed in those schools, which were in any case closed down on account of COVID. So there could have been a better management of migrant workers. But as far as the initial management of COVID in general is concerned, I think we may all have hindsight wisdom. But to begin with, I think the decision taken by the government to impose a ban and impose certain restrictions was well worth it because, as I said, it gave opportunity for the healthcare services to equip themselves. And as you see now, by and large, whoever is getting that infection is able to find healthcare. This would not have been possible had it been allowed to happen in the beginning. As I keep saying that we all have hindsight wisdom and we all have easy solutions to problems. You know, India is a very interesting country. We are a democracy where almost everyone has an idea to find a solution to a problem. You go to, you walk down and talk to anybody, they'll tell you how COVID should be handled. But the tragedy is that for an idea to fructify in a country like ours, it has to be politically acceptable, socially desirable, technologically feasible, financially viable, administratively doable, and judicially tenable. Now, it's a handful. Having been in administration myself, I know it's very easy to talk about things. Talking is the easiest thing to do, which I do these days, but walking is very difficult, which I considered when I was walking as a civil servant.
Sir, what would you say? I mean, you have experience in so many fields. Do you think the government has done enough as far as the economy is concerned, or for boosting the demand, something more than what has been done should be done by the government?
I have looked at very closely at the various packages that the government has announced. Now, let us understand the limitations within which government had to act and then try and analyze these packages, whether they are worth it or something more could have been done. Everyone keeps talking about putting in more money in the hands of people. Yeah. Now, how does and where does the money come from? Right now, in any case, the revenues have been impacted because of the poor business. So government doesn't have revenue flow. The option available with the government was to print currency notes. That is an option which with the Keynesian model is that you print more notes, go for deficit financing and put money in the hands of the people. Now here there is a problem. The problem is that it's a very difficult choice to make. If the money available in the market is much more than the goods that are available, then it will lead to inflation. And all of us know inflation hits the poorest of the poor the most. So it's a very, very difficult decision whether to print these notes or not. If you print them, because normally in a Keynesian model, the supply side will pick up within a few months, it will come back. So the supply of goods and services will match the additional supply of money here. In the present instance, that didn't appear very likely because no one was aware till when this COVID lasts. So the supply of money would have increased and the supply of goods and services would not have increased, would have led to inflation. In any case, you were seeing some of inflationary pressures already coming in. So it was a very difficult thing to do. What could have government done to do this without pumping in money, which was an easier option, but with graver consequences? Now, the government could have used this time, and I hope they use this time, there's still time available, to encourage business to come back to business. Now, let us look at sectors which can actually impact employment phenomenally, because employment is the key. Where is the employment coming up? The biggest employer in the country is the real estate, the construction sector. That's the biggest employer. The government has come out with some measures, but I'm not sure whether they're going to help. Because I live in Noida and I look around, I see construction activity to a grinding halt. So now, how do I encourage that? That's something which government needs to engage. Now, what has happened? What happens typically in government is you look at a sector as an entirety, as a monolith, and that's where the problem arises. You have to segment the sector. So instead of treating everyone who deals with real estate with doubts and distrust, if we look at each of the project and try and ascertain what is the cause of the delay in that project. In some cases, the owners or the managers or the proprietors would be at fault. Please hang them. But in a large number of cases, they have come to grief without their own fault. Let us try and understand what can there be done. And this is where indulgence should be. The problem today that I see in governance is that everyone seems to be too busy with headlines.
Yeah.
When you don't have time to go into the details of it, because that won't give you publicity, that's where the problem is. So as I was telling somebody yesterday, we are so enamored with the roaring of the Make in India lion that we don't even see what distance it has traveled. Right. For it to travel some distance, people will have to sit down. Why isn't it traveling that distance? And even before that, you have to admit the fact that it is not traveling the distance. Right. Now, first of all, I will not admit, we'll say, no, it's not only roaring, it's traveling. Right. Then I don't even look at the existence of a problem. So you have to recognize the existence of a problem. Then you have to understand the why of a problem and then work toward the solution. Now, all this will not give you publicity. So one has to be very conscious of the fact whether I want to deliver things or I want publicity.
Right.
That is some of the problem that I see. Everyone wants to hit headlines. When Make in India was happening, I had seen people going to Davos. What is Davos going to do with Make in India?
Right.
Make in India has to happen in India, because then photographs of Davos are much more attractive to newspapers than photographs here. So the fundamental problem that I see today is our inability to find the nitty-gritty. Now, it is not in all sectors. We must learn from the success of some sectors that have happened.
Right.
Look at how Swachh Bharat has succeeded. Let's try and understand why it succeeded. Look at how Ayushman Bharat or PMJY is doing a phenomenal work in the field. Let us try and understand how that has happened.
Right.
We can learn from both these successes as well as failures, but until you admit a failure, you will never learn from them. So the tragedy is, first, we are trying to treat everything as a success. That's a problem.
Right.
There are enormous number of successful stories, I tell you.
Right.
And they need to be understood, they need to be talked about. But parallelly, we must admit the failure of issues like Uday. Uday was to revive the power sector. It has collapsed, but we don't admit it. Until you admit it, you will not even try to understand the reason of that failure. Until you understand the reason of that failure, how will you make it a success? And this takes me to my experience in coal. People ask me, how did coal happen? It happened because there was an admission of a failure. It happened because we went into the root cause of the problem and then we tried to sort it out. That is how almost every sector will have to be looked into or looked at, into first admission of a mistake or a failure if it has happened, then understanding why it has happened and working out a very detailed plan as to how it could be revived. And you don't have to go to Timbuktu or Davos to learn the solution. Solutions are here. Again, giving you an example of the power sector. The power sector has been reformed in Gujarat. As coal secretary, I used to tell my minister, why can't we learn from what is happening in Gujarat? I don't have to go to the rarefied atmosphere of Switzerland to find solutions. They're available here. You have to sit there and work. So to me, that is the basic problem.
You brought in the subject of coal, sir, which everyone has some idea after Supreme Court cancelled more than 200 blocks allocated since 1993, and you held the auctions in a very transparent manner. You have written about it in your book also, but I think you, as is your want, you have avoided, you talked about roadblocks, but avoided the negativity around it. Anyway, in any case, sir, let the viewers, our viewers get it straight from the horse's mouth. That's one. And after that, number two, what is your view on the, the minister, coal minister, so vociferous in making a case against government currently diluting its stake in Coal India? So about divestment of Coal India, what's your view on that?
Let me start with divestment of Coal India.
So,
we must first try and understand the objective of an action. Why are we taking that action? Are we divesting in coal because we don't have money to balance the budget? So by divesting, I'll get some money there. If that is the reason, please go ahead, divest it and get some money. Though, of course, I disagree with that. That should not be the way of balancing the budget. But if that is the case, please go ahead and do it. Second, if you want to improve the management of Coal India by divesting, so 5-10% divestment will not help, because government will continue to hold controlling shares and they will continue to mess with the management there. Why I say mess with the management? Look at what happened to Coal India. When I joined in 2014, there was a crisis all around in coal sector. Crisis, shortage. 28 power plants were critical, super critical in the sense of having coal for only one day. That was the criticality of coal sector. And to cut a long story short, which has been told in the second book, which probably you couldn't mention, is The Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant, where I talk about the true coal story, the real coal story. The real coal story is increase in coal production. No, I'm not going to go into the details of how it happened, but that's the true story. Within 2 years, we came to a situation where we had a reasonable amount of coal to think in terms of exporting coal to Bangladesh. Now let us try and understand why and how did the success happen and how coal production collapsed after that. So the collapse of coal production was not because of disinvestment or investment. That's why I keep saying you must understand the objective of any activity. It collapsed because we did not have a regular chairman for Coal India for full 1 year. Now imagine from the heights that it has achieved in 2016, coal production again did not increase in the manner in which it did, and there was crisis returned. So the crisis in Coal India is not an account of the share of the government, but in the context of the indulgence and on occasion non-indulgence of the government. So we must understand that very clearly. So disinvestment has to be understood in the context of the objective that you have in mind. If you want to give it into private hands and privatize it, of course, I have a different view on privatization, but leave that aside. Then give the controlling shares to a private entity and let them do it. You want to hold controlling shares, disinvestment only means getting money to balance the budget. So as far as that is concerned. Now coming to the other part of the coal crisis. I remember when I took over as coal secretary, or when I was asked to join as coal secretary, I didn't know much about the coal sector. So I rang up a friend of mine to ask him, "Yaar, coal sector kaisa hai?" So instead of answering my question, he said, "Gangs of Wasipur dekhi hai kya?" So I knew what the sector was. I mean, anything that could have gone wrong had gone wrong. But when I looked at the files and the details, I found that the CAG had gone just overboard without going into the details. They have just brushed everything in the same color. You know, I have explained that at length in my book, both Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant, on what wrong went. And I will take a minute to explain this. Sir. Imagine what the CAG has done. I mean, in his book, he writes, not just an accountant. I think he behaved just like an accountant. Because what he did was, he took the average cost of mining of Coal India, and then he applied it to all the coal blocks. Now, anyone who understands coal sector will know that mining cost varies from 400 rupees to 3,000 rupees per ton, depending on where the coal is, the depth of mining, the quality of coal. How can you average it out and work out the notional loss which he did? And it became very clear, became subsequently very clear that this was pure and simple nonsense. And since Supreme Court put its stamp on it, speaking against it would tantamount to contempt. These days, Supreme Court is very sensitive about contempt. So they haul up anybody on contempt to go. No one speaks about it. But some people dare to speak about it. Mr. P.C. Parakh spoke about it. I have written elaborately in my book. So far, no contempt has come against me. But I'll wait if it comes. But let us understand the facts. The analysis that the CAG did was factually incorrect. And I have put it on record and no one has come back to me to contest what I've written. Secondly, the greater damage that was done by CAG was in terms to going to town with that report. That created such a vitiated environment in the coal ministry that decision-making became very difficult. Joint secretaries were not willing to commit themselves on the file. And I didn't blame them because they didn't know if something went wrong, even if they didn't have a Malaf ID, they would be hauled up. Fortunately, this government has amended the Prevention of Corruption Act to delete that clause which led to non-Malaf ID convictions. Because if there is no Malaf ID, how can you hold the officer responsible? Now, I'm not going to the details of what happened in Mr. Harish Gupta's case, but the fact of the matter is, it created a vitiated environment. Right. So what we did was, we put in place a transparent coal block auction mechanism, which stands good even today. I'm glad the current coal block auction is taking place on the same platform. It has stood the test of time. So we did that. But the problem was that at that point in time, again, I have written Ethical Dilemmas of Civil Servant, that there was so much maramari about coal that everyone went overboard to bid for the coal blocks, and then they found that so much revenue was not coming. A lot of problems have arisen out of that. So, now people have assessed those blocks realistically, and my hope is that these coal block auction would be better and more realistic.
So we'll come to your home state, your cadre state, Uttar Pradesh. It is now placed at second slot in the Business Reform Action Plan, and it's supposed to have implemented nearly all the reforms suggested by the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade. Covers labor regulation, online, single window facility, access to information and transparency, land and administration, construction permit, everything. And it's attributed to some part to the successful implementation of Nivesh Mitra portal. So knowing the state as well, now how would you rate it? How much of this is hype and how much of it is going to have real benefit on the ground?
See, I have no first-hand experience of what has happened, so it would not be appropriate of me to comment. I think the best people to comment is people who are going to benefit out of it. I've often wondered, these ratings, etc., should not be done by somebody else. The rating should be done confidentially by those that suffer or benefit out of the actions. They are the best people to rate. Not in conferences, because no one has the courage to speak the truth. There, if they speak the truth, they will be in trouble. So best would be have a confidential understanding feedback from those that they know where the shoe is pinching. I don't know, why do we go to World Bank to determine which state or which is best or not? World Bank is not the sufferer. The sufferer or the beneficiary is the industry. And as I keep saying, instead of going around the world and telling the world that you come and invest, you treat your existing investor well. He will be the best promoter, because I have often said, हलवाई तो अपनी जलेबी को अच्छा बताता ही है, तो खाने वाले से पूछना चाहिए कैसी जलेबी. So here, the consumer is the industry. They should be able to judge. I am nobody to judge whether what they are doing is right, wrong, good, bad, or ugly. I mean, it will be, in any case, I have not seen those details, so I can't comment on it. Even if I had seen those details, mine is a very, very academic way of looking at things. The practitioner in the ground will be able to tell you whether things have changed to his benefit or not.
Right, sir. So now, before we end the program, sir, one last question, which you would have answered umpteen times in various forms. But as I said, I have heard you speak many times, and here you quote, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Seminal prayer lines of Reinhold Niebuhr. And let me add my own interpretation of your philosophy as शिकवाए जुल्मत शब्द से कहीं बेहतर था कि अपने हिस्से की एक क्षमा जलाते जाते. So if you speak about this before we end the program with perhaps one or two examples for the benefit of viewers.
As a civil servant, we must understand the limitations of what we do. Sometimes we don't, and we end up in grief. I have always believed that as a civil servant, I am not a revolutionary. If I were to be a revolutionary, I should pick up a jhadu and join a political party. Here, I could be a fast evolutionary. And there, once you understand the domain in which you can do a lot of work, then that domain increases. Many civil servants tell me there's so much problem here, so much problem there. So I asked him very simple question. I asked him, and the common blame is on the politicians, unfortunately. And I asked him, has any politician ever asked you to come late to the office? Yet we come late to the office. Large number of us come late to the office. Has any politician asked you to keep your office dirty? Many of us keep our office dirty. Has any politician asked you to sit on a file and not to take a decision? Very rarely it happens, yet we sit on the file, we don't take decision. Has any politician asked you to not behave properly with people who come to meet you? Yet we behave improperly. So when you keep asking this question, you define your domain. And once you discipline yourself and improve your conduct in this domain, your domain increases. I mean, in my entire career, I never ever went to any politician for any favor. Yet, when there was crisis like in the coal sector or in the PNG, they called me. Fair enough, they called me. I'll go and do my job. The domain increased because whatever little I could do in my limited context, I try and do it. Now, if you try and hit your head against the wall, then you will get injured and you will not be even ready to take other battles on. So fight the battle that you have under your control, do well, and then your domain will expand, not by you, by somebody else who will think of you worthy of taking on areas which you had not covered so far. So that's what my advice to all my colleagues and civil servants are. Don't become a revolutionary. And you become a revolutionary and then you go in grief and then you get transferred and then you start, displaying your transfer as roll of honor or badge of honor and tell I was transferred so many times. I've often wondered, your job is to do your job. You don't have to unnecessarily fight with politicians. When I started my career, and that I have written in my book, Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant also, to begin with, I also thought every fault is with the politician. Gradually, I discovered they're as good, bad, and ugly as any one of us in the civil service. So, and then finally, a civil servant has to realize this, that you should not compromise, but you have to accommodate. In life, you got to accommodate. You don't want to accommodate. You think that you are the only. The problem is that you think you are the only honest person going around. The rest of the world is dishonest. You end up fighting with everybody. Then you are unable to deliver. So the bottom line is you have not merely to be honest, which is essential. You have also to be efficient. You have to deliver things on the ground.
Yes.
And that is where accommodation is required.
Thank you very much, sir, for joining our program and sharing your wisdom. And I hope we'll be able to have you again on our program someday. Thanks once again.